the bulk of today's work will be about the refinement of short-term recommendations, and we'll do next steps in closing before 2 o'clock. So our meeting objectives: review the project plan and timeline, and refinement of short-term recommendations. Next slide, please. So our working agreements that we would like people to agree to for this next hour or so. Make space, take space, make space for each other. What we pay attention to grows, be mindful. Confidentiality, take lessons learned, leave the details. Practice yes and, both and, holding space for multiple truths. Reduce gatekeeping and exclusion, so limit or explain acronyms. Value the process as much as the outcomes. Be aware of intention and impact and attend to both. Remember why we're doing this work, because it matters. Practice grace, have fun, and be present. Is there anything else that anybody wants to add? You could raise your hand or put it in the chat. Okay, next slide, please. So follow-up items from the previous meeting. The recommendations have been organized into categories, and there's a creation of a shared platform space that's in progress, pending group members responding and getting enrolled into that space. Next slide, please. So we're going to move to project plan updates. Next slide, please. So here's a revised timeline. We're able, thanks to Neelam's effort, to get an extension on when this work needs to be delivered. So we have a little bit more time to review and refine recommendations. So today is meeting 4. We're refining preliminary recommendations. Meeting 5 is going to be December 4th. We'll be finalizing the preliminary recommendations, and then we need to find a time in January to meet to approve final recommendations and approve the report and presentation. In January 2025, prior to meeting 6, the final recommendations will be drafted and sent to the HCWF committee and GAC provider work group for review. And draft report and presentation will be sent to HCWF committee and GAC for review. In February 2025, that information will be presented to HCWF committee and HEC for approval, and then sending the report to the OHA director and OHPB. And in March or April 2025, there'll be a presentation to OHPB. So we're adding a meeting. So you all will need to be on the lookout for a meeting time selection email, and then some time to iterate on and review recommendations. Any questions about the timeline? Raise your hand, unmute, put something in the chat, whatever works for you. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so one of the things that's been going on behind the scenes is to try and categorize the recommendations as a way to make them more able to be shared and more understandable by people who might not have so much information already about these topics. So this, as suggested in the previous meeting, the recommendations have been grouped into these categories. So there's a question coming here, which is, are these categories accurate? So the first one is the GAC Advisory Committee. The next category is workforce development in the training arena. The third category is workforce development in the recruitment and retention arena. The fourth category is organizational supports, and the fifth category is access. So does this sort work for you all? Any comments? Anything you'd like to see different? Again, raise your hand, unmute, put something in the chat. What are your comments? If they seem accurate, yes, Yulia.
Hi, I think these overall look pretty good. I'm wondering what the organizational supports that both feels right, but also it feels like we're missing something here around the systemic changes that need to happen, kind of on systems levels, because, so much of these are dependent on the broader systems that are in place. And I need to go back into the details of what was meant specifically by organizational support. So that may not be exactly where it goes, or the change that needs to happen. But I just kind of, what that feels like it's missing to me is that we're not thinking on a more kind of systems level, what is actually needing to change here.
Thanks, Julia. Alex, I see your hand. And I just want to say that the next slides are kind of contain the details about the categories. So that might be helpful. Go ahead, Alex.
Thanks, Alana. This is Alex, and I just agree with Yulia. That was one just title that I think didn't quite click for me. I wasn't totally sure how to change it. So thank you for bringing it up, Yulia. And well, like one thing that I added was organizational change instead of organizational support, because I think to me it captures a little bit more of the intention to have that change and not just support things that are, but to change things. And so I also just appreciate that kind of systems and institutional component of that as well, Yulia. So just wanted to mention that because it was on my mind and would be happy to kind of when we get to that slide, bring it up again to see if there's something we can adjust that captures really what's in those recommendations. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. And I think it does make a difference to have the categories feel accurate because that'll be how people read the content that follows the category heading. So I think you're both right. It really is helpful to make sure that we're naming it correctly. Yeah. Um, Okay, so organizational change management and systems change from Rebecca in the chat. Dels agrees. Thank you for naming this, Yulia. So let's take a look at the specifics about these topics, and maybe you all can help think about the titles. So next slide, please. Um, So the GAC Advisory Committee, so these are divided into short-term and long-term, and you'll notice there's also a numbering system. So this is topic number one, and the first one is called 1.1. So the short term is call for the formation of an official GAC Advisory Committee that is compensated, comprised of trans and non-binary patients, providers, and knowledgeable allies with a seat at the table, access to power and decision making, charged with developing comprehensive community-driven recommendations beyond this group. So that's the short-term 1.1. The long-term is establish a permanently approved GAC Workforce Advisory Committee. 1.2 under this section 1 has two other long-term recommendations, adding OHA policy staff to work on GAC and an OHA leadership role, and funding GAC needs assessment, mapping, and data repository role. So that's the kind of the detail for this one. Please feel free if you have comments, again, unmute, raise your hand, or put something in the chat. Next slide, please. 2, workforce development in the category of training. So 2.1, short-term GAC training. 2.2, oh, and then the long term is mandate GAC training for all providers and clinical staff. 2.2, support GAC clinical competency training. And then the long term would be to mandate GAC clinical competency training for applicable providers. 2.3, support trauma-informed care training. 2.4, support implicit bias training, mandating the long-term mandating implicit bias training for all providers and clinical staff. And 2.5, supporting training and utilization of SOGI data collection and mandating REAL-D and SOGI data collection for healthcare workers would be the long term. Yulia.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
What is the intention or behind making these recommendations, particularly having short-term and long-term recommendations in this context? Are we really thinking about moving towards, hey, we as this group want to be shaping long-term policy recommendations at this step? Are these suggestions for the future advisory committee that we're calling for? What maybe just I want some clarity on that because then I have a thought, but I want to check my assumptions before I go with that.
Thanks, Julia. I'm looking to one of the OHA uh, staff. I don't know, M or Neelam. Somebody have some thoughts for Julia? Alex.
Yes, this is Alex. I'm happy to say a few thoughts, but I also would welcome anyone else from OHA. I don't want to say that I speak on behalf of everyone. So yeah, if Neelam or M, please feel free to correct me or add. I would say that this work group is not charged with completing any of these policy recommendations. These are kind of considered preliminary recommendations, is the wording in the letter. But I do think that they would provide a great framework or maybe a head start for the gender affirming care permanent work group, the advisory committee, that is the first category of recommendations here. So I think this would serve as kind of a guiding document that might go into a charter, or it might be used to guide internal OHA policy. And then it might also kind of identify priorities for that, like long-term legislative policy development. And again, that this group won't be responsible for making that happen, but that longer term Gender Affirming Care Advisory Committee would. Neelam?
Thank you, Alex. Neelam?
No, thanks. I think Alex summarized it really well. Just to put a slightly different spin on the way we were thinking about it was that, you know, we would, in the short term, recommend what OHA could do within its existing sphere of influence, and then start a permanent work group, which you all will be advising on in 2025, that will make recommendations for some actions that might require legislative change and action in subsequent sessions.
Thank you, Neelam. Julia, did that answer your question? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I appreciate that clarification. I think it is a little bit aligned with what I was kind of thinking this was, so I appreciate that context. I guess the thing that I've been struggling with a little bit and as with this homework, and I also shout out for like creating this kind of opportunity to engage with this work. I think it's super creative for us to be able to kind of think about it more deeply outside of just these meetings. So appreciate y'all. So here's kind of one thing that I have been trying to work through in the sense that it does sound like part of the intention is to have this be like the foundation and defining the scope, like with words like charter and stuff, of the advisory committee that will get us hopefully called into action next year. And while this group, like there's so many rad folks on this team already and on this work group, and I'm so excited to be working in partnership with y'all on this, we are missing huge community representation on this committee, right? And we are doing our best given our insights and our positionalities, but we don't have, like, we are just not the people who need to be in these conversations are not here. So while I don't want that to preclude us from making suggestions, I don't want this to kind of shoehorn the future advisory committee into a narrower scope than maybe we that we want to do. We want them to be able to have to this this advisory committee that hopefully will be permanent to really represent the depth and breadth of diversity within the queer and the trans and non-binary communities and GAC patient communities, as well as providers who care for them. Like, we want that, and then for them to have the full agency to determine what happens next. So while I don't want to stop that to stop us from doing this important foundational work, I would be cautious about using or framing this as these are recommendations of what OHA needs to do or should do. And this is the specific scope that the new committee is going to be brought in to then implement. So it could just be a change of language here, is that these are like this is a planning and a suggestion space, not a recommendation and like mandate kind of space. I don't know if that makes sense and how other folks feel about that, but I'm just concerned about the fact that we just do not have all the folks who need to be part of this conversation participating in this conversation, given that so much seems to be happening in pretty intense, like these are some pretty broad, or not broad, but like very good recommendations. But yeah, that's what I've been struggling with.
Yeah, thank you, Yulia. That's very helpful. And I don't know if you saw the responses as you were speaking, but hearts and thumbs up and clapping hands. Thank you for raising that. It's super important. Other comments about the training slide? Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. So, and keeping in mind Yulia's comments about this is a beginning, this isn't all the things, right? This category is category 3, recruitment and retention in terms of workforce development. And there's short-term 3.1, provide informational webinars on best practices and GAC. 3.2, support the creation of a GAC workforce learning collaborative. And long-term fund the GAC Workforce Learning Collaborative coordinator role. 3.3, share and promote affirming HR policies. And then the long-term would be to mandate affirming HR policies. Any thoughts or comments about recruitment and retention category? Okay, next slide, please. So this is the category that you all said you might want to rename organizational change or something else. So invitation to think about what you'd want to title this as we're talking about this. So this is category 4. So 4.1, support GC organizational changes, signage, billing forms, bathrooms, etc. And then the long term would be mandate GC organizational changes, signings, billing forms, bathrooms, etc. 4.2, support GAC at school-based health centers. And then long-term would be mandate GAC at school-based health centers. 4.3, support recurring GAC echoes. And 4.4, create support a GAC peer support group for providers moving this work forward. Any thoughts or comments about this slide, including what you want to name it? We've had organizational change as one suggestion. Other thoughts? Unmute, put it in the chat. Raise your hand. Any other thoughts on this one? Okay, a couple of thoughts in the chat. Julia says, I think this could be organizational changes, but I think one of the evaluation criteria for all the recommendations is the systemic changes that would be required. And Dale said organization/systems change. Thank you for that. And there's a heart on that one. Thank you. Okay, next slide, please. So this is number 5. This is called access. And 5.1, increase telehealth opportunities and utilization. And with the long term being legislatively increase telehealth opportunities and funding. 5.2 being have a caregiving program in place for patients who don't have support to create a care program. For example, pro-surgery care or ejection anxiety. 5.2, long-term, more providers doing surgery, especially in rural areas. And 5.3, mandates for educational pipeline changes to increase the number of GAC providers, mandate to increase funding for trans and non-binary CBOs. Thoughts or comments about access?
This may already be sort of embedded in, oh, sorry, this is Julia. This may be embedded in some of these or earlier ones, but um, I almost want to add here something along the lines of increase the amount of primary care providers who can offer gender-affirming hormone therapy, because so many people think just explicitly of surgery in GAC, but so much as hormone therapy, and that can oftentimes be managed in primary care settings. So I don't know if that's an additional one or embedded in a different one. Just wanted to be explicit about it.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. Other comments about access? Del.
I think to Yulia's point too, and clearly I'm going to have a bias here, but I think gender affirming care doesn't have to be medical either. It also includes therapeutic care. So I think that we need to be thinking about the full scope of what gender affirming care actually is.
Right. So it could be therapeutic. Don't have to think about just medical. Thank you, Del. Okay. Any other comments about access?
Yeah, I have a question about the long-term recommendation for surgery, especially in rural areas. I'm just curious about the scope of surgical access across the all kinds of care in rural settings and how that intersects with this recommendation. Um, certainly there are rural hospitals, but I'm not sure to what degree surgery, in what parts of the state surgery would be available.
So
Did
Sam,
anyone have any thoughts on that?
Sam, you're kind of wondering about where it's already available, or kind of what's the kind of state of things right now?
Yeah, recommending increased access to gender affirming surgery in rural areas means that there needs to be access to surgery, period, in rural areas. So I'm just wondering how that's being considered, or if it's been considered, um, because that taps into a much larger issue than just there aren't gender affirming surgeons employed at whatever center. The center might not even be there.
Looking to OHA staff, I don't know, Alex, Neelam, thoughts?
We don't have that data at our fingertips, and I think that would speak to kind of doing a more comprehensive gender affirming care provider needs assessment. That would require resources. We could certainly get information about the current state of things from some of our colleagues.
I think that makes a lot of sense, to get a sense of the landscape and perhaps, if it's, it depends on the type of surgery you're talking about, but some of them require multiple days stay in a hospital, right? Versus like a ambulatory walk out the same day. So maybe it's, for those areas, it's where they don't have that access. We can also talk about how do we, do more to support people getting into the care where it's available, in addition to this concept.
Yeah.
But certainly we need to know the situation first.
Yeah. Thank you, Sam. Alex, I see your hand.
Yeah, thanks. This is Alex. I feel like there's a couple really great threads here, so just appreciating the extra refinement here. I'm just looking in the chat and seeing how Yulia has kind of expanded to capture a few of the different pieces around just beyond just talking about surgery as one form of gender affirming care, but also gender affirming care as a whole. So I would support that kind of wording change. But then I also am hearing the first of all the needs assessment component, which I think is really helpful. And if that is not a short, like I'm curious what a short term component of that could be, because I do know that there's some work around gender affirming care needs assessment in the workforce report that is coming out soon. So Neelam, you could mention that, but also having that as a long term, like having gathering and reporting on the data on access throughout the state to gender affirming care services. And then I also am hearing the need for like addressing the systemic barriers to that. So it's not just having more providers, but that there also are other barriers to accessing that care. That's just like what I heard you kind of recognizing, Sam, speaking to. So I think just in this category of access, having something that acknowledges that, you know, both uncovering and then addressing those systemic barriers to care, which could have very specific policy changes down the line. I think that's really important too.
Thank you, Alex. And I also wanted to reflect Yulia's comment in the chat. Maybe the change needs to be more providers offering GAC, including GAHT surgery, culturally aligned mental health care, especially in rural areas. Yeah, thank you. And well put, Alex, from Sam. Thank you. Any other comments about the access slide? Okay, next slide, please.
Yulia, were you going to add something else?
I mean, always, but that's why there's a risk of having me involved with anything.
No, that's why we have you here, Yulia.
I think there needs to be an explicit recommendation about closing gaps in access more, not just sort of more broadly around GAC, but within trans and non-binary communities. Like there's reference here sort of implicitly to an inequity in access between metro and rural areas, but we know those are not the only inequities. So I think that needs to be its own explicit recommendation in that category.
Thank you, Yulia. And thank you for unpacking that because it's more complex than just rural and urban. Yeah, thank you. Okay, and yes, I want to second what Alex said, which is that we want to hear people's thoughts and perspectives. That's why we're having a meeting. So don't worry about sharing your perspective and voice. That's what we're here for. So this is the homework. I think, part of the challenge, we didn't know that we're going to get the extension in time. So we're pushing really hard to get people's responses to homework, to these questions this week. Now we have a little bit more time, but we still want to ask folks to complete this homework so that we can have as comprehensive a collection of people's perspectives, ideas, opinions, experience, and insights. So the short-term recommendation refinement, the homework assignment took the questions we practiced with in the previous meeting and applied them to all of the recommendations. So the questions are meant to help us further refine the recommendations and make them actionable. Work group members were asked to complete what they could in the short turnaround time. I think people had like 48 hours. Today, we're going to review and build on what we have so far, and we'll be finalizing the recommendations in the next meeting on 12/4. So please send in your homework by December 2nd so we can incorporate everybody's input. If you have done so already, thank you so much. And know that you have a little bit more time to submit additional thoughts if you have them. The full compilation of the homework will be included in the appendix of the final report. Next slide, please. So these were the refinement questions. The ideal outcome / vision of success. So this is kind of getting people thinking about this for the homework or thinking more about it if you've already submitted something. So enter what you think an ideal outcome is or difference this will make for people seeking gender-affirming care. Suggested activities to support or implement this. So list or share any activities you think will be necessary to achieve the outcomes you listed. Key considerations, any issues that you think will need to be attended to. Furthering equity and anti-racism. What else can we do to make sure we are moving toward anti-racism and equity in this work? Any potential opportunities for community engagement? What, if any, ideas do you have about the role of community and community partners in making this successful? And then OHA resources. What work has OHA done in these areas? What OHA teams, projects, or partners are important to this work? So these are questions we want to invite you to think about, and we'll be looking for your input in response to the homework. Next slide, please. So workforce development, recruitment, and retention recommendations provide informational webinars on best practice and GAC, support the creativity of a GAC workforce learning collaborative, share and promote affirming HR policies. Alex.
Hey, Alana, yeah, this is Alex. And just not to interrupt, but I do want to say that I did put together a whiteboard that I think organizes these recommendations and the questions in a visual format. So if that would be helpful to look at that at some point, just want to make sure that you know that that is ready if you want to use it at any point. That's it.
Sure. Yeah, I think it would be good to do both, to both go through like the linear written words and also to see it on a whiteboard, because different people process information in different ways, and it's good that we have a variety. Thank you for doing that. But now we lost the slides. Am I just not seeing them, or is nobody?
I can still see them.
You
I
can
still
still
see
see the slides and I can't. Oh, well, that's fascinating.
Wow.
You may need to change your view. You may have accidentally clicked on a different view.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Nope. All right, well, we don't need to. I don't have the slides anymore. Let me go to my version of them. Sorry.
We are on the workforce development, recruitment, and retention slide, if that helps.
Yeah. Well, it would help if I could get to my slides. Sorry, everybody. Somebody else want to go to the next slide and then and read it out for me, and while I try and figure out my tech. Apologies.
If I could step in, this and I had a couple of homework assignments trickle in, and I know it's just a lot of work in a short turnaround time. We selected that the recruitment and retention one specifically because it could probably benefit from some more brainstorming. So going over this one specifically, this is showing just what's been contributed so far, and that we could use this time to maybe brainstorm more in this category. And if it does serve to pivot to the whiteboard to capture that real time, that could be one way to do it. But I'll read so far what we have for ideal outcome, vision of success. Creating more access to GAC providers and to STNB clinicians. Setting a standard that Oregon supports 2 STNB folks and providers who support 2 STNB folks. Providing mentorship to GAC providers. Sharing success stories, opportunities for continuous learning. Organizing and funding either CBO, educational institution, and or state-funded resources that provide training and support for GAC providers. So again, that's in the category of recruitment and retention. Alex, do you think this would work well if we pivoted to brainstorming on the whiteboard?
Yeah, I mean, and which slide number?
It's page 21.
The
Yeah,
ideal outcome vision of success.
okay,
I can't see the numbers of the slides.
Slide 19.
that's fine.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So we can, yeah, we can. I don't know. Okay, ideal outcome vision of success. Let's look at that one. Let's finish the slides and then we'll go to the whiteboard. So on slide 19, ideal outcome vision of success, creating more access to GAC providers.
Sorry, Alana,
Or
sorry
we
to
did
interrupt
this
you. We
one.
just went over this one.
We
We
just
should
did
be
this one.
going over the next one.
20.
I think it's slide 20. Yeah.
Yep.
Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you for keeping me from repeating. Suggested activities to support or implement. Identify current well-regarded GAC providers, staffing necessary. It would be important to have a group of thought leaders with operational experience along with members of the community. Nothing about us without us to work with the state and set up and fund the system. Thoughts about suggested activities to support or implement? Okay.
What about like a community whiteboard? So some way that the community could contribute virtually, a platform like that, a graffiti board that feels really accessible, something people could be creative and express themselves in different ways.
Yeah. Thank you, Danielle. And people don't have to like have linear sentences. They could contribute in what way makes sense to them in a way that's kind of visually represented. Thank you, Danielle. Other thoughts?
I kind of have a thought, sorry, and I didn't have a chance to go through all the homework, so this is not here, and I know we'll continue this later on, but so much of the struggle with staffing and pipelines and having providers who have the right training to provide gender affirming care is that they're not getting that education in their medical schools, nursing schools, PA schools, and so forth. And I know we're thinking Oregon specifically, but it does feel like there could be an opportunity for OHA to call on like the major professional associations or the national, like the American Association of Medical Colleges, things like that, to be like, hey, this is a huge gap that your providers coming out of your institutions are not able to care for our residents. And so not only having an Oregon specific thing, but have maybe like having OHA call for changes nationally, given that so many of our providers also come from outside of state, and including also institutions of higher education, medical education in counseling schools in Oregon itself, but actually working with those institutions to make sure that they're training providers in this. So we're not then having to do all the remedial work or like having them do it as part of continuing education versus part of their core medical, healthcare, mental health education.
Yeah. Thank you, Yulia. Other thoughts? Okay. So next slide is the key considerations. Tell me if I'm off track, but that's what I have next. So some key considerations in all of this, the safety of staff and attendees, and looking beyond the one-off training model to create systemic infrastructure that allows the ongoing integration of the GAC ideas and ideals into our existing system, and an approved model that administration providers can use to forward the conversation in their health center. Kind of adjacent, Yulia, I think, to what you were just talking about. Yeah. Okay. So the next slide, please, is about furthering equity and anti-racism. We need to develop a statement. So there's lots of room for more ideas and suggestions in this space. Any thoughts from the group now? Remember, this is part of the homework. You'll have a chance to respond to it. Any thoughts in terms of furthering equity and anti-racism? Okay. Okay, thank you, Yulia. I'll add my thoughts with the homework. Yeah, I think a lot of people will do that. And so this is maybe seeding your brains, priming your brains to have thoughts about this. Next slide, please, is potential opportunities for community engagement. We need strong community partners here in this space. Other thoughts about this now, or use this as a primer for your thoughts in the homework. Next slide, please. So finding out about OHA resources, what's already happening, what's already been done, who is already working on this. Again, subject for the homework, and then any other general comments. So let's go now to the whiteboard. Alex, if you would be willing, I think, will you take us there, or that would be great for us to take a look
Yeah, I'm
at.
happy to do that.
Thank you so much.
Okay, just 1 second here. Okay, and this is still a work in progress. I just put this together today, but I think it's just a kind of example of a kind of visual organization that we can use, just like Alana said, to have kind of multiple options for ways for people to provide feedback and look at all the different input that we're getting. And I think like we definitely can add to this and talk about it right now, but also would just love any input on the format of just like, this is what I like about this structure, and this is what I would change about it. Maybe these are things that we can add. So you don't have to have like only direct input to like fill this out, but also if you have suggestions to change it, just want to say that's really welcome and that I will not take it personally at all. This is just a template that I use. So like I have no personal attachment to this format. Okay, pulling it up. Haha. All right. Is that working? Can people see that? You can just give a little thumbs up or nod. See a nod from Danielle. Great, great, great. Okay, so I am going to zoom out.
It's a little, sorry, it's a little hard to read the small boxes. But other than that,
Totally.
it looks really beautiful.
Great. Okay, well, I'm going to zoom in a second, but first I'm going to zoom out just so we can see it, like the whole scope. So don't worry about reading what's on there yet. So you can see that it's a grid, and then across the top are the 5 different themes that we identified. And you can see I changed to the 4th one just a little bit. So we'll update that with the any consensus that we come to. But you can see the 5 different themes across the top. And then down the side are the, first of all, recommendations, both short and long term. And then the different questions that we're asking people in the homework assignment. So here's where we'll add kind of ideal outcome vision of success, key considerations, suggested activities, equity and anti-racism, community engagement opportunities, and the OHA resources associated. Okay, so that's the framework. And then I will zoom in and you can see really the only thing that I did so far was I started filling out the recommendations. So I've put those on sticky notes here. I think this is a great format too, where you can like react to them. You can add a +1, or you can add this little kind of thinky face. Questionable. You also can make comments on them using a comment tool and just be like, actually, I want to know more about this thing. So I hope that this could be there's also the stamp tool, which I think is cute. Where's that? Yay, hearts. So hopefully this can be a really interactive way to, and there are some, I just want to acknowledge that this is a Teams whiteboard function, and the like most accessible version of this, the Jamboard, is a tool that is being shut down, so it's not actually still even available. So just wanting to balance that, like we want to make this as accessible as possible for people who are in this work group and even potentially beyond to be able to contribute to it. And just acknowledging that in this moment, I think that only people who are either internal or have gone through the approval process to join the Teams channel for this group will be able to actually edit it. So that's my understanding. Okay, so I think that's a good little intro, but let me just pause and see if anyone has any immediate thoughts or questions or wants to see any other parts of it or the functionality, and also Alana, if you have suggestions, they're welcome to.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. This is great. You got lots of props in the chat, and people like it. They like it. Dell said, my visual brain loves this. So yeah, this is a really nice, accessible way of laying this out. Thank you so much. And so people who get access will have access to this. How are we going to make sure people have access to this?
I can definitely, so this is Alex again. I can post a link to it in the Teams for this group, the Microsoft team. And just want to acknowledge again that some people might not have already gone through that process to get approved, and that process itself is not very accessible. So just I've seen that from the Health Equity Committee's perspective as well, that getting people through that process is not, it's not a process that we designed or that I personally endorse. So anyways, that is one way that people who have gone through that process can contribute.
Thank you. And I know Deepti sent out an email that was going to help people to gain access. So
Yeah.
if you haven't seen that, or if you haven't responded to it, that's one first step people could take. Yeah, and a few folks have gotten access, Neelam noted.
Okay, good. Yeah, I was curious if anyone has gone through that process. I'm gonna see if I can
I was gonna say,
add
Alex,
anyone.
this is Deep D. With the whiteboard that Katrina had started about a week ago,
Yeah.
I was able to add Cindy, Alana, and Michael, even though they were
Oh,
internal, just add it
nice.
directly. So I think we should be able to do it that way. The Teams channel is a little bit more complicated, but I think for this document we can add access one by one.
Okay, that is awesome. I'm gonna put the link then right here in the chat and see just if it works for folks. Let me try this again.
Thank you.
Okay. Can edit.
This is a great collaboration tool. And it's also a really nice way to be inclusive of those of us whose brains work differently than a list of sentences on a page. So Alex put the link in the chat. Somebody want to click on it and see if it works for you? An authenticator window pops up for Beck. Yeah,
So it's like it's wanting you to log into
that's
Microsoft.
That's what happened to me too. Yeah. So it may be another step to make this work.
Yeah.
So, but we don't need to work out the tech now. We can work on that.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
And it does look like some internal folks. I'm seeing M here. Does have it open. Is that true for internal people?
Yeah, I saw M's name in the document.
Yeah, and here's Deep T. Okay.
Okay. So yeah.
I will commit to working on that to try and make it as accessible as possible.
Thank you, Alex, and thanks for doing that. I agree with Danielle. It is beautiful.
It's colorful. I like colors.
Yes.
Apologies to anyone who, if the contrast is not up to our standards, but.
Yulia, you also had an authentication requirement.
Yeah.
And it was a two-step, like it sent me an authentication via email, but then it's like now you have to open the authenticator app on your phone, and that is not set up. So yeah, it stops me there.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to know where the blocks are. Okay, so we just have a couple of minutes left, and we just have a couple more slides. So if we can go back to the slide deck, we're into the section called Next Steps and Close. Let me see. So Jessica's, are you sharing your screen again? And can people see the next steps and close slide? Not yet.
Not yet.
See? Okay. Okay. All right. So we're on, yes, slide 28, next steps and close. Okay, next slide, please. So this is what you have to look forward to. Please review the homework and get more ideas, insights, brilliance, wisdom, thoughts in so that we can compile them by the 2nd of December. It's lovely if you can get it to us sooner. Whoops. It's lovely if you can get it to us sooner because the compilation hopefully is going to be a lot of ideas.
Sorry, finding the right slide. I apologize.
It's fine. It's
There
slide
we go.
27. Yeah.
Woo!
So on the 4th, we have meeting number 5. We'll be finalizing preliminary recommendations. So that's why it's important to get the homework in by the 2nd so we have time to compile everything. And again, sooner is better if you possibly can. Please make sure to respond to some upcoming emails regarding access to shared workspace and scheduling meeting number 6, which will be probably in early January. Excuse me. It would be, Yulia said it'll be helpful to get an instruction guide for getting into Teams. Filled out the visitor agreement, but then didn't know what the next steps were. And Yulia, I just want to say I feel your pain. I have had exactly the same experience. So yeah, we'll try and get some information to work group members about how to conquer that barrier. And then please respond to, you're going to get a scheduling request so that we can schedule meeting number 6 in early January, because we want to be able to take this into the next stage of refining some recommendations. So the plus delta is a evaluation that we like to do at the end of meetings. So the question goes like this: what went well or could have gone better for either yourself or the group in terms of process, how we work together, or content, the work that we got done today? So went well, could have gone better, yourself, the group, process or content. How was today's meeting for people? Any comments? Can unmute, put something in the chat. Any thoughts about?
I just appreciate how y'all organize this and getting the documents in advance. Really like just really like the team effort, and when technical stuff inevitably comes up, it seems like y'all have each other's backs, and I'm really grateful for that, and that you get support during those stressful moments. So thank you for holding it and holding good space.
Thank you, Danielle. Me too. Other comments about how today went for folks? Yourself, the group, process, or content?
I guess I'll just say it out loud. That chart is really, really helpful for me. I feel less, I'll say I feel just, it's easier for me to understand it all and interpret everything. So thank you so much for that work. I'm sure it was quite a haul. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Danielle. Other thoughts about today's meeting? Okay. Our last activity is a word about how you're feeling as we're leaving the space, as we're wrapping up. And if you're willing, I would go in reverse alphabetical order to hear from everybody a word on how you're feeling as we wrap up. So that would be Stephanie, Sam, then Rebecca. If you're willing, and also you can pass. Stephanie, are you willing to start?
Sure.
Encouraged.
Thank you. Sam, then Rebecca, then Neelam.
Excited.
Thank you.
Am I next, Rebecca?
Rebecca, yep, then Neelam, then Mackenzie.
Inspired.
This is Neelam. Busy.
Okay. Mackenzie, then Yulia, then Ian.
This is Mackenzie. Grateful.
This is Yulia. A little frazzled, but that's just also mostly my day, not this group.
Ian, then M.
This is Ian. Relieved.
This is spiraled.
Okay. Del, then Deepti, then Danielle.
This is Del. Gratitude.
This is Deepti. I feel encouraged.
Focused.
Thank you, Danielle. Then we have Cindy, then Beck, then Alex.
This is Cindy, feeling grateful.
Oh, that'd be me. This is Beck. I think all right. All right is my word right now.
Thank you, Beck. Alex, then Jessica.
Yeah, this is Alex, and I'm going to invent a word. It's exhaustivated, which is a combination of motivation and exhaustion, which I am anticipating will be my mood for the foreseeable future.
That's pretty well. Thank you.
I like that new word. I may have to steal it. But the word I was thinking of was effective. This felt like a very effective group today. And this whole course of collaboration just feels very effective.
Yeah. Thank you. And my word is inspired. I want to just really appreciate exhaustivating. Yes, absolutely, Alex. I think that's the perfect word for a Friday. Just most Fridays. I just really want to thank you all for taking your time and putting your brain power into doing this work and thinking in detail and on so many levels. A lot of time today and looking at the responses that have been coming in and the homework just made me really appreciate how much care and thought and attention you're putting into doing the work and helping to really move the work forward for everybody in Oregon. Really, really appreciate you all. Thank you so much for being here, and please respond to the homework. If you have other questions, feel free to reach out. But we look forward to regrouping and seeing you all in early December. Yulia, I see your hand.
Just in case this is relevant to the group, does it matter whether we respond to the homework through the document or if we get access to the board? Do we complete it there? Does it matter?
Yes, please respond to the homework via the email. Yeah, and then we can add it to the board. I think it's okay. I think Alex, you're open to having people also comment on the board, but for compiling everything and making sure we get all of the information and everybody's thoughts, it would be super helpful if you could respond to the homework in the email. Yeah. Thank you. Great question. Very, very, very good question. We wouldn't want to be confused. All right. Anything else for the good of the group? All right. Thank you everyone again for your time and your close attention to this work. Really appreciate you. Take care. Have a good evening.